Welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast, hosted by divorce financial analyst and retirement planning counselor Andrew Hatherley. Join Andrew and guest experts as they help late-life divorcees build the financial and mental foundation for a meaningful future. There is life after divorce. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast. Do you know when to say no? Are you a people pleaser who would rather defer to someone else's wishes just to get along? Is your reluctance to set boundaries hurting your marriage? Or perhaps you're in the middle of divorce. Are you standing up for what's rightfully yours? Maybe you're in your 60s or 70s and emerging from divorce, and you can see this as an opportunity to reset your life and grow personally. How can resetting boundaries help you live your best life ever? My guest today, Tracy Gould Sheinin, is a specialist on the subject of boundaries. Tracy has worked in the conflict resolution field for more than 2 decades. She's served as a court-appointed mediator in the Atlanta area for more than a decade and currently provides divorce mediation, mediation coaching, and conflict coaching through her company, Clarity Mediation. Recently, she launched a new program called Peace Through Presence, which offers one-on-one coaching in mindfulness techniques and conflict navigation. Tracy has a BA in psychology from the University of South Carolina, Go Gamecocks, and was the founding chair of the Association for Conflict Resolution South Carolina chapter. She's a member of the Academy of Family Mediators, the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, and, like me, is a member of the Amicable Divorce Network. Tracy, welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Very happy to have you here. And this is a really interesting topic, that of boundaries, because I've heard the word a lot recently in the self-development literature. And perhaps we could begin by defining our terms. What do you mean by boundaries, and what place should they have in our lives?
This is one of the most important things to know about boundaries, I believe, is that they are rules we set for ourselves, not others. So we have our boundaries. First, we have to figure out what they are, but to have them respected by others, we've got to tell people what they are. We have to voice it. And then we have to reinforce that. We have to back it up and act on it so that people get the message. There's often the assumption, and I do it myself, that other people can read our minds. They know what we think or feel, and we expect them to act a certain way. But the reality is we've got to tell them what it is we do or don't want. And then we're going to probably have to repeat that once or twice or maybe more.
I've in the literature on boundaries, I've seen a lot of people come out and say boundaries is about saying no, and it's the art of saying no. How do you take that approach to boundaries?
It certainly can be. It can be having the inner strength to say no when it's hard for you. If you're typically a yes person, you say yes to please others. Like you mentioned in the intro, a lot of us do that. We feel like it's going to be easier. It avoids conflict, we think, but it doesn't serve our own best interests, the things that we want to have or not happen for ourselves. So yes, saying no is really important at times, but boundaries is also about knowing when to say yes and when to say no, when to say maybe, I'll get back to you later, and being able to say no later. And then a familiarity with all the different kinds of boundaries there are. It's not just, do you want to go out Friday night? Everybody's going. And you say yes because you feel the pressure, but it's more than that. It's time, yes. Physical space, how someone, sits close to you when you don't really know them that well. Personal space, as in who you have in your home, when and for how long. Right? We just got past the holidays, so people might have experienced some of that.
Right.
Financial financial boundaries, lending money or spending how you want to spend money without, blowback necessarily. Materials. Then there's having the freedom to say what you think. I think we should all be respectful, of course, but you can have your own thoughts and beliefs, and should be able to hold those without criticism. Um, these are all different kinds of boundaries. There's a lot more than people realize, I think, often.
Yeah, in preparing for discussion, I came to realize that you mentioned the physical boundaries, and you can have relatively innocuous issues of boundary setting. I'm thinking of, do you remember when Jerry Seinfeld was hugged by somebody on the red carpet at an award show and he backed off? It made all the media. I guess he was
Yes.
setting his boundary at that point.
Yes. Yes. Not everyone wants to be hugged.
Not everybody
And the
wants to be hugged.
huggers out there, yeah, we've got to respect that. Maybe ask before you hug, unless you've hugged before and it's okay.
Yeah, you have to establish, the openness to hugging for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
on a more serious side, though, you can think of boundaries could rise to the level of sexual harassment at work, both in
Yes.
terms of physical touching and or inappropriate comments.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Sort of the dark side of it, but it really exists. And this is where we often think of it because we're upset about something that happened to us. And so it occurs to us, well, that wasn't right. I don't want that to happen. They crossed a line. They broke my boundary. Some we might think, well, of course you're not supposed to say, inappropriate sexual things to each other at work, but it happens a lot. And so for the person who's being spoken to, it's that person's responsibility to say something to the inappropriate speaker, at least to start. Hopefully it stops there. Again, not easy to do, but that's how we set a boundary, is to say something like, that felt inappropriate. I don't appreciate that kind of talk at the workplace. Would you please not talk to me like that again moving forward? I appreciate it. Thank you. You can be very polite about it, but also firm.
Right. I think, in terms of the strategies of dealing with um, or setting your own rules and maintaining those rules. And it's important to, as you say, to nip things in the bud.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
when people are going through, tough times in their marriage, before we get to, the decision to divorce, how can setting boundaries in a marriage perhaps forestall divorce or do away with the potential at all?
Yeah. Um, Great question. So many folks will tell me that the communication was broken. That's why they're divorcing.
Mm,
And I think that's really very common in relationships and maybe every relationship, that communication is a challenge. We're not really trained for this. We go into it and we do it our way. And then even if we get better at it, and maybe we do take some training and we're like, I'm going to be a great communicator, but then your partner didn't take the same training or maybe doesn't have the same drive and intention. And so then there's the rub, is that you're not communicating in the same way with the same goals. So setting your boundaries and enforcing your boundaries with your partner definitely comes down to good, healthy communication. And it might be around time. An easy one would be time. You've got a very energetic partner and you're a real quiet homebody. And Friday night rolls around, you're exhausted. You can't wait to be on the couch in your sweatpants with some popcorn, and
right.
they want to go out. And that might be just a conversation that you have to have around, no, I'm going to stay home, and sort of been reinforcing that boundary. But then, of course, it gets into money and intimacy and outside family dynamics with in-laws. Again, people coming to your house and talking about those boundaries around who you want there, when you want to do things, when you don't want to do things. You got to talk about it,
It's
and it's
it's
not
it's
easy.
you're so right, Tracy, about communication. And you've mentioned something twice. And it's funnily enough, it's been an issue of discussion of communication between me and my wife. And you've mentioned it twice. I think it might be an issue in your family too. The thing about people staying at the house or coming over to the house. Because I was always the type of person, oh, we've got a guest room downstairs, you know,
Hmm.
they can stay there. And I found out pretty early in our marriage that my wife's not big on having having strangers in the house. And she communicated that to us very clearly. And so she was establishing her boundaries. And I appreciate
Yeah.
that. And we've come to, rather than let it fester, we've come to an agreement that mothers-in-law essentially are the only ones allowed to stay in the house.
So you have an agreement. I
We
like
have an agreement.
it. Because you talked about it. You both wanted to figure it out. You cared about yourselves and the relationship enough to figure it out. That's the other piece, of course, in a relationship that is growing stronger or not, where it's not just about communicating well. You have to want to communicate well, and you have to want to build a healthy relationship. And if both people do, you've got a great chance of success. But if one person is not on board with trying to do those things, it's going to be real hard.
Well, and communication is a two-way street. You know, um, as you said earlier, people aren't mind readers, and I think
Yeah.
the stereotype perhaps is that um, you know the male would be the one who isn't understanding or isn't listening. But I've said this a couple times in my life. I'm not a mind reader. If I'd known that this bothered you, we could talk about it and deal with it. And
Yeah.
typically, that's the opening to a resolution of the issue. So us
That's
guys
right.
aren't mind readers.
It's true, you're not, and it's not just gender specific, but it is, we all are products of a lot of generations of a lot of habits and societal ways. But yeah, I think having the person say, I'm not a mind reader. I didn't know that. I don't know unless you tell me. And I want you to tell me. I want to understand. I want to hear from you. The intention or the desire to understand is what's at the core of good, healthy communication. Not just winning an argument, but actually understanding each other. Even when you disagree, you can still
Right.
understand each other. Yeah.
Right. No, exactly. And when I think of setting boundaries, and I've been somewhat of a people pleaser over my life, certainly a lot less as I've gotten older and don't put up with things that I might have put up when I was younger, or gotten a little braver perhaps as I've gotten older,
Yeah.
and gone through divorce, and we can talk about this in a second. But I think one of the benefits of setting boundaries, there's so many benefits, and perhaps you could go over what you see as the benefits, and we could chat about that a little bit. Because in terms of personal development, I've found that what I've seen in myself and what I've seen in others through the ability to set rules for oneself, it's been a tremendous boon to my overall happiness.
Mm. That's great. Yeah, I think that's where it's at. As we grow, again, if we have the desire to learn and grow in our personal development, we're going to figure out what makes us happy, what doesn't, to be real simple about it. And then from there, it's that boundary piece of, okay, that doesn't make me happy. I might say yes to these things. And at the moment, it feels okay because I'm pleasing that person, and again, maybe avoiding some conflict in that moment, but I actually don't feel great because I really don't want to do it. And so we take on that negativity internally. The other person doesn't even know it, probably. And then we're dealing with it internally. So the benefit of being able to say, I really appreciate the invitation, but I'm going to pass on this one. I'm going to stay home. But thanks so much. Y'all have a great time.
You know,
That's me.
Yeah, us introverts would rather stay home and
Exactly.
watch a movie than go to this party or this new
Yep.
nightclub. No, not nightclub. That's a long time ago. Restaurant
Yeah,
or whatever. But
exactly.
people people get upset if you go out. So there are people you go out with and they want to go out again and again. And you've really got to say, I'm not really into that sort of thing. And setting it in the bud can be so liberating,
Yeah.
both in terms of the benefits, in terms of your own time,
Yep.
in terms of feeling good that you've stood up for yourself. And you do it in a
Yes.
way that perhaps you could share a technique here, because I know that I think, requests of our time, whether it be for a social engagement or a professional engagement. How would you suggest that we set a rule or a boundary to that other person without hurting their feelings, and to what extent can we control their feelings? That's the other thing.
That's a good one. So first part, techniques in how to set our boundaries around time. On the personal friend social side, if it's a repeated thing, if they say, hey, we keep inviting you and you keep turning us down, we're starting to think you don't like us. And it may be that you say, oh gosh, no, it's not you at all, I adore you. If that's true, I adore you, I'm not big on going out, maybe we could find another way to hang out. Would you be open to coming over and watching a movie at my place sometime? Or maybe we can go do something during the day, like throw out some other ideas if you really do want to spend time with that person. Now, if you don't want to spend time with that person, you're making excuses. That's another discussion. But you
Well,
may have to
let, let
hold
let's
those boundaries.
let's not push it aside, because that is a
Okay,
discussion sometimes. I
it
mean,
is.
um, ultimately, there potentially might be hurt feelings in a situation like that.
There might be. And it may be that you're not crazy about hanging out with that particular person or people, that crowd, for various reasons. It might be a personality conflict, it might be what they're doing, but um, it is a boundary to say, to protect yourself. If let's say your acquaintances or friends with somebody that their personality brings you down, it just, you leave feeling drained, it just, you feel their negativity just brings you down all the time, and you realized it and you're like, I don't want to do that anymore. It's draining my energy. I'd rather be with positive people, I'd rather laugh. And so you make excuses and you start avoiding them, and they start to say, I feel like you're not wanting to hang out with me. Sometimes you have to have that conversation to say, well, I do love you, I care about you. It's just often our conversations are really negative focused, and I've been feeling drained. I need more positivity in my life. See if you can maybe turn it around with them, for them. However, to your point earlier, if somebody's feelings get hurt, maybe they're not feeling very evolved and open, and they get mad and their feelings get hurt, which is very likely and common, understandably. Nobody wants to be told they don't want to be hung out with. You're not responsible for their feelings,
Right.
is the easy answer. Is we are not responsible for anybody else's feelings. We're
Right.
barely even responsible for our own. They just happen. It's what we do with them that
Exactly.
matters.
Exactly. Let's get back to divorce. This is the Great Divorce Podcast, and let's put ourselves in the middle of the divorce process here. As I say ad nauseum on this podcast, as I'm a financial advisor and work with people before, during, and after divorce on their finances, divorce is often the largest financial transaction of someone's life. And I would think, well, I know, but I would interested to get your thoughts on this. How setting these boundaries or these rules can really work to your benefit during the divorce process to essentially help you stand up for yourself and put yourself at the end of the divorce financially on a better foot that you might otherwise be if you adopt bad habits of constantly wanting to please others.
Yeah. Probably the most helpful thing at the very beginning, as you enter into the divorce process, is to realize and know that the boundaries you're used to are going to change. Sometimes that kind of comes as a little bit of a surprise to folks. They can't believe this happened because it's always been this way. And then I'm there pointing out, yeah, but y'all are getting divorced. So it's not going to be that same way anymore. So just knowing that boundaries are going to change can prepare you that it's going to happen. We don't always know what it's going to look like, but it's going to happen. And then, like you said, there's the financial boundary, your physical space. Somebody's going to move out at some point, probably. And then there's like information boundaries when you're divorcing. You're even when things aren't great in your marriage, you likely share certain kinds of information on a regular basis or by default, whether it's about extended family or whatever. That's going to change also. You're not going to talk to each other about the same stuff anymore. Now, if you have children together, if you're younger and you have children together, you're going to be talking to each other, but that's around, should be just around the kid, unless you're like super collaborative. But knowing that it's going to change, knowing that these are the possible boundaries that could change and that need to change. So on money, depending on what your finances are historically, at some point you're going to need to separate. The difference is how much separation needs to happen. Some folks, as you know, keep their stuff, their finances separate during their marriage, large part, separate accounts and everything. Other folks have everything together. So the process of separating accounts and dividing up the money and then managing your own money alone away from that person is a whole new boundary and a whole new frontier for folks that especially haven't been doing it themselves for a long time.
Right.
But
And if people haven't been setting boundaries and rules for interaction with other people, once we get into the divorce process, know that there are professionals such as yourself available to coach people through the process. I mean, you work as a one-on-one coach, do you not?
I coach folks as they prepare for mediation.
Okay.
So I don't do divorce coaching per se one on one, but as somebody's prepping for mediation, absolutely.
And the attorney also, I mean, the attorney is your representative.
Yep.
So one way of perhaps avoiding falling into the trap of being bullied is the old standby, talk to my attorney or have your attorney talk to my attorney. I mean,
Right.
uh, I don't think that's always an optimal situation, and it can get very expensive. But certainly, if you do have an attorney and avail yourself of their services in standing up for your rights, and whether you're coaching through the mediation process or a therapist who perhaps might be help with emotional regulation as you deal with all these big decisions that are going on, or divorce coach, these professionals can all help you perhaps learn to set boundaries if that's not been something that you've made a good habit of throughout your marriage.
Yep. And yeah, if you're learning it for the first time, learning to manage your money for your own self, your own household, separate from this person that you've been with maybe for decades, finding the boundaries there around what you talk to them about or what you let them have access to. And then, you deciding, okay, I've got this much coming in. How much do I spend on this or that or save here or invest there? Those are all your personal individual choices that you would maybe have consulted with your spouse previously, but now, it's probably none of their business. And depending on the dynamics, if there's a emotional safety factor at play, it may be emotionally dangerous to let your soon-to-be ex in on this kind of information, even though you're used to it. It can be a real hard one for people to grow into if it's all new to you. But it's really important so that you can take care of yourself without that kind of fear of harm.
No, exactly. And for our listeners who tend to be older and emerging quite often from longer marriages and perhaps being brought up in a different era where
Yeah.
gender stereotypes and marital stereotypes were more prevalent, it can be quite a shock to the system to
Yeah.
have to go our own way and make decisions and stand up for ourselves. As I mentioned, going through the divorce process, I always recommend using the professionals that are there to help in these matters, especially when major financial decisions are being made. But after divorce, and this I think is a tremendous opportunity. I've seen it in my own life and the things that I've accomplished after my divorce in my late 50s and now early 60s, have really inspired me to help others and realize essentially their potential to grow. You may be familiar with the psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, who wrote about post-traumatic growth. Boundaries can be a big part of that in boosting our self-esteem and just little things. Just standing up and saying no or doing something for ourselves as opposed to deferring to someone for the first time can be a catalyst to some great habits after divorce.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah, it's really true. Often, folks, after divorce, it's really normal to feel very guarded. You've just went through such a vulnerable experience, um, unquantifiably vulnerable experience, right? And so people feel very guarded, nervous. I encourage folks to take it as an opportunity to reset. And like you said, there's this amazing growth opportunity ahead. So getting started, reset. It's okay to stay home physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually, both literally and figuratively for a while as you start to figure these things out and take those little steps. Say no for the first time, or get to know your financial advisor better and start following their budgeting guidance and that sort of thing. And there's going to be some trial and error as you figure it out. You're going to say yes or no at a time, and it's not going to go quite like you wanted it to or you hoped. If that's okay, just say, all right, well, that was a trial and an error. I'm going to trial and error again, and keep growing. So it's okay to be guarded, I think, at the very beginning, but you don't want to be so closed that you cut off any potential growth. So there's going to be these little small openings that you can take advantage of as you grow in your strength and start to feel a bit safer out in the world and navigate what your new boundaries are that you get to define yourself.
For older divorcees, it brings me back to what you're saying about boundaries, about time. Because the fact of the matter is that, we all have a best by date or an end date. We don't know when it is exactly, but it should encourage us to live in the present and to make the most of our opportunity here on earth. But the fact is, somebody getting divorced in their 60s has less time than somebody in their 30s or 40s typically. And I think quite often that can be the catalyst to getting divorced is waking up in the morning in your late 50s, early 60s and thinking, I really don't want to be waking up next to this person for the next 20 or 30 years of my life. And perhaps that's the great boundary setting or rule that sets you on a course to personal growth and resetting your life is acknowledging that your time is precious. Perhaps you don't want to spend it in this marriage. B, standing up for yourself through the divorce process. And then C, I was going to say C, determining who you do want to spend your time with. And this can get into, relationships after divorce.
Yep.
And perhaps maybe you have some thoughts on this, because in terms of setting rules, I remember when for a significant period after divorce, I just did not want a deep involved relationship. But then, I started to think that this is what I wanted. But I had some rules. and that, the person that if I was going to be with somebody for the rest of my life, that person had to be kind, intelligent, have a good sense of humor, and be independent, have a life of their own, not simply rely on me for every ounce of their happiness. And I wonder if relationships going forward can benefit from rules or boundaries like that.
Sure, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Divorce is the one of the biggest boundary setting or resetting opportunities that folks have. Saying, this isn't working for me anymore, I want a divorce, however you phrase it, is setting a huge boundary, especially if you've been together for decades. And then once you get through all of that, and you find yourself in your own place, in your own space, deciding, okay, now what, is a really wonderful opportunity to figure out what your own boundaries are. Because when you've been with somebody for decades, 4 or 5 decades more, your boundaries can get really overlapped and enmeshed, and you it's not uncommon to have lost track of what yours are or were or could be. If you grew up together and you when it got into your 60s together, you matured together in a way that can create that kind of enmeshment. So yeah, step one, noticing that you've got an opportunity to create the life that you want at this point in life, and knowing that it's up to you to set those boundaries, all the ones, the time, the money, the space, the spiritual expression, any of the things. And like, I love how you did it. You said, I need, if I'm going to be with somebody, here are the set of rules that have to be in place. Those are boundaries. And then of course there's finding the strength to say no thank you if you meet somebody that hits 2 out of 5 or something like that. But that's hard. It's hard to say no thank you to people, or to walk away from folks. But and like you said, if your life window is a little smaller than it used to be, you may think, heck, what do I have to lose? I can say, you've been lovely on this date, but that was it for us. And you don't feel so bad as you might have 30 years ago, because you've grown so much.
It's funny you should mention that Tracy, because next month we're going to be having another podcast on dating after divorce, and I'm sure
All right.
these various issues will be discussed in quite some detail.
Excellent.
I really appreciate your time here. You've been very generous. I wonder, before we conclude, is there anything that perhaps I might not have asked that you'd like to convey?
Just to reinforce that everyone has the power and capacity and responsibility to set their own boundaries, decide what they are, and it is okay to say what your boundaries are to the other person. It is okay to do that, and you are not responsible for their feelings. I do encourage manners, politeness, and respect, but that can be done. That is all achievable, and you will be happier in the long run if you can do that for yourself. It might take practice,
Right.
but that's what life is, right? A bunch of trial and error, really.
Exactly. It's trial and error until the end, I think. Tracy, if our listeners are interested in finding out more about your practice or would like to work with you, first of all, do you work with people outside of the Atlanta area, or any of your services offered nationally? And how can people get in contact with you?
Yes, thank you. I do. I work with folks outside of the Atlanta area. I would be happy to talk with anyone one-on-one around. I neglected to mention this earlier, conflict coaching as well as mediation coaching. So if you've got something of a pickle you want to talk through, I'm available. I can be reached at tracy@claritymediation.net. That's my email. And then my website is claritymediation.net.
Terrific. Tracy, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this discussion.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Gray Divorce Podcast. To learn more or get in contact with your host, you can visit Andrew's website at transcendretirement.net. Also, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Information provided is educational only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Each situation is unique and should be discussed with your tax or legal advisor prior to implementation. Andrew Hatherley is not an attorney and does not provide legal advice. Information provided is financial in nature. Advisory services offered through Hatherley Capital Management, LLC. Divorce financial analysis services offered through Wiser Divorce Solutions, an affiliated company.